Hi guys, today I'm providing a demo of the Cwejman RES-4 Quad VC Resonator eurorack module. It's a very interesting module. It's basically a 4-band voltage-controlled parametric resonator. And what that means is that the signal that is input into the module is basically going through 4 bandpass filters in parallel. And then that filtered sound goes through multiple outputs, which I'll detail here shortly. And you can use this type of module to create really organic sounds. You can use it to create these sorts of vocal formant type synthesized sounds. You can also use it to create chord-like harmonic sounds as well. The two outputs on the module include a bandpass output and a notch output. And there's the signal coming out of both outputs simultaneously. The bandpass output is the sum of filters 1 through 4. In all these filters are in phase. Whereas the notch output is the sum of filters 1 and filters 3 in phase, and filters 2 and filters 4 in an inverted phase. So the notch filter will provide an interesting frequency response in different tones than the bandpass output. And one interesting idea that people sometimes do is that they will use both outputs simultaneously, and they'll send those outputs simultaneously to a stereo pair and get some really interesting sorts of phasing type of effects. So let's walk through the different control knobs on the filter. Each filter in the RES-4 module has its own peak frequency knob, a bandwidth frequency knob, and a level knob. The peak frequency knobs allow for ranges between 16 hertz and 16 kilohertz, so pretty wide frequency range. And then the bandwidth knobs allow for a range between a few tenths of a cent and a few octaves. So that's impacting essentially the width, the range of frequencies around that peak frequency response. And then the level control basically attenuates that filter signal from anywhere from 0 dB all the way down to minus 80 decibels. Each knob, each filter within the RES-4 has its own control voltage inputs. So you see that there's RES-1, RES-2, RES-3, RES-4. Each one of those resonant filters has a frequency input, a bandwidth input, and a level input. At the very top of the module, you'll see a small LED, and that's an overload LED signal indicator. And essentially what that's saying is that it's very easy to push any of these 4 filters into resonance, or all of the 4 filters into resonance simultaneously. And that feedback signal may tend to overload the module and generate some distortion in the resulting signal. And so that overload indicator is telling you if your input or output is basically in an overload condition. It's easy to push the module into overload, and many people, what they'll do is they'll either set up patch-in attenuators before the input or after the output in order to really tame the signals a bit on this particular module. There are 2 master control voltage inputs. One is a frequency input, the other is a level input. Those are really helpful, especially if you want to be able to manipulate all of the frequencies simultaneously on all 4 filters. So instead of having to patch into a multiple or something and have a bunch of patch cables plugged into each individual filter, you can just control them all at the same time using that single frequency input or level input. And then finally, there is a switch here that is a bypass switch. So you can bypass the module. I'll show you an example of that. So you'll hear the filtered signal, and then I'll switch on bypass, and you'll hear what the unfiltered signal sounds like. So you can tell the filter's really making a huge difference. It's adding kind of a liquidy sound to that particular signal input. In terms of the way I've currently got this module patched into my system, what I'm doing is I'm taking two oscillators off my Cwejman RES-4 MK2. One's a square, one's a saw. I'm mixing those oscillator signals and I'm sending them to the input on the RES-4 module. Then I'm taking the bandpass output and I'm sending that back to the S1 MK2, where I'm taking advantage of the VCA and the envelopes on that semi-modular synth. So essentially the RES-4 is replacing the filters on my S1 MK2 at this point. What I'm also doing is I have a Cwejman PH4, which is a 4-phase signal generator. I've got that plugged into multiple CV inputs on the RES-4 module. The PH4 is basically generating 4 saw wave LFO signals. But those LFO signals are all out of phase. So I'm taking different phased square wave LFO signals and patching them into either the frequency or the bandwidth control voltage on each one of the 4 filters. And what that's doing is it's really adding some dynamics to the sound. So I'll play it again and I'll dial down the PH4 so that it's not adding so much modulation, so you can really hear the difference. So this is with very little modulation. You can hear there where I dialed back in that modulation, and again, it's adding that really sort of liquidy type sound to the signal. And I know that's a sound that a lot of people really love because it gives this sort of organic texture to that particular signal. It's a really interesting module to play with. You can patch it into all kinds of different modulation sources. I've also got a Cwejman RG6 random generator module. You can patch that in there and do some interesting things. People like to send triggers and short sort of like impulse type signals into the RES-4, and the RES-4 will turn those into sort of a pinging type sound. That again, it's only way to describe it is that it's a really organic type of sound, which is incredibly interesting to hear. So it's a great module, guys. Highly recommended. I know that many people say it's one of the top 10 eurorack modules out there. That's for good reason, just because it sounds amazing. Anytime you plug a signal into it and start turning these knobs, really interesting sounds and textures come out of it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video today, and thank you for watching.